Think about the most frustrating moment you can experience as a science educator. A student perfectly recites a complex scientific law on their midterm, scoring top marks. But the moment you put them in front of a physical experiment the next day, they stare blankly at the materials, completely unable to apply what they just wrote down. This happens because of the traditional lecture-first model. We rely on it for a very practical reason. It is incredibly efficient. It saves educators massive amounts of prep time to stand at the front of the room and deliver clean, prepackaged definitions straight to the students. But that efficiency comes with a steep hidden cost. By handing over the answers immediately, we rob students of the cognitive friction required to actually understand the material. As a result, we see high failure rates the second those students are asked to synthesize information independently. To visualize the relationship between teaching and reality, we map it on a grid. The horizontal axis is knowledge retention. The vertical axis is real-world application. The lecture-first model lands here: high vocabulary retention, but dangerously low capability for actual application. This isn't a new discovery. Educational theorists like John Dewey documented this exact flaw decades ago, noting the severe disconnect between the passive reception of facts and active, experiential learning. High vocabulary test scores provide a false sense of security. Genuine scientific literacy lives in the messy, unpredictable friction of reality. The fallout of this application is an erupting papier-mâché volcano. Students default to these loud, highly visual projects because they are the easiest to execute, even though they are completely empty of actual scientific inquiry. The root cause here is that these students haven't been taught how to be genuinely curious. Faced with an open-ended assignment, they panic and rely on their parents to execute a generic, store-bought kit. This presents a massive dilemma. How do educators pivot a classroom from rote realization to active scientific inquiry without utterly derailing their strict curriculum deadlines? To solve this, we are going to analyze the return on investment for 3 specific teaching pivots you can implement right now. Until we change how we hook a student's interest in the classroom, these science projects will continue to test a parent's ability to follow instructions rather than a student's capability to think. Pivot number 1 requires a shift in how you physically begin your lesson. Normally, a teacher writes the topic of the day on the board and starts talking. We need to replace that with the insight anchor method, which presents the students with a puzzle before they have any context. Instead of announcing, "Today we learn oxidation," you walk into the room, place a fresh white slice of apple next to a deeply brown slice, and ask the room, "Why did this apple turn brown?" In a physics class, you drop the title Newton's First Law. Instead, you ask the students why their bodies violently jerk forward when their parents slam on the car brakes. This small adjustment captures their attention immediately. By starting with a real-world phenomenon, you trigger an innate psychological need to solve the mystery. There is a strict trade-off here. You have to be willing to tolerate 5 to 10 minutes of messy, entirely incorrect student hypotheses before you finally step in and hand them the clean scientific answer. The constructivist theories of Jean Piaget validate this exact approach. Forcing students into a moment of cognitive conflict, letting them struggle to make sense of an observation, builds significantly stronger neural pathways than passive listening. Starting with a phenomenon hook costs you a few minutes of instructional time up front, but it guarantees sustained student engagement for the entire remainder of your lecture. Phase 2 moves the classroom away from fill-in-the-blank worksheets and towards DIY design thinking. For example, you bring a dying, wilting organism into the classroom. You give no instructions. You force the students to observe the plant, identify the potential causes, suggest their own solutions, and then physically test them. But curriculum optimizers will immediately spot the bottleneck. What do you do when your school lacks the budget or the physical lab equipment to run these kinds of tests? The alternative is utilizing free digital simulations, like PhET Interactive Labs. These platforms allow students to safely manipulate abstract variables, changing pH levels or adjusting battery voltage, without needing a fully stocked physical laboratory. Whether you use physical plants or virtual labs, the required trade-off is the same. The teacher has to temporarily pause the curriculum to teach foundational data analysis skills first. Students cannot effectively track variables, read a graph, or observe a virtual atom if the teacher is always the one interpreting the results for them. You have to teach them how to look for the patterns themselves. Intentionally slowing down your syllabus to build that base data literacy is a strategic cost. Doing so drastically speeds up the success rate of every single lab assignment they will tackle for the rest of the year. That brings us to Phase 3, completely overhauling how students select their end-of-year science projects. The formula for authentic project selection relies on combining three things: a student's personal interest, their current skill level, and a meaningful real-world problem. If you have a student who loves sports, you bridge the gap between disciplines. You connect their biology knowledge with technology, perhaps partnering with the IT teacher to help them create a custom heart rate tracking app for athletes. The primary anxiety educators face with these custom cross-disciplinary projects is figuring out how to grade highly subjective, unique ideas fairly and consistently. The actionable solution is to sit down directly with the student before the project even begins. Together, the teacher and the student co-create a custom evaluation rubric. When a student physically helps build their own grading criteria, they take total ownership of the methodology. That sense of ownership completely eliminates the urge to hand the project over to their parents to do the work for them. If we zoom out from the daily classroom grind, we can look at the macro-level return on investment for all of this effort. Educational research led by Scott Freeman tracked failure rates across hundreds of university classrooms to see exactly how teaching methods impacted student survival. This chart shows the stark difference. In lecture-heavy classrooms, failure sat at 34%. With active learning, it dropped to 22%. That 12% reduction proves that giving up total instructional control and letting students wrestle with the material saves failing students. These metrics prove that science education succeeds when it produces capable, independent problem solvers who can navigate uncertainty. To get those results, you need to identify your specific role and take an immediate next step. If you are a time-poor educator, ignore the heavy project overhauls for now. Focus on adopting exactly one phenomenon hook per week to start shifting the classroom dynamic. If you are a hands-on parent, stop buying pre-made science kits. Use the interest framework to intersect your child's natural hobby with a real scientific question they have to figure out on their own. And if you are a school administrator, you need to mandate cross-disciplinary planning and enforce student-teacher co-created grading rubrics. Educational ROI scales when prioritizing the friction of student-led investigation over the comfort of instructional control.